Hello, folks. My name is DC Rockwell, and this is your co-host, Elio Greco. Welcome to Code and Chaos, a pseudo-random conversation that starts with tech and ends where it ends an hour or two later. Tonight's conversation is brought to you by our subscribers and by EGX.org. Elio, let's talk about our options. Our options in the world of protecting data, protecting our own data. What kind of options do we have? And, are some of the more obvious solutions actually real solutions? This all came about because somebody very close to me was asking about our non-legal options for data protection. Just recently, we had a conversation with Samantha Sims about some legal options for being able to solve the problem of data custody and solve the problem of breaches and things like that. And, close to the end of that episode, we were talking about how long we're going to have to wait for strong digital identity and secure data transmission, protocols to be implemented around the world. And this person in my life, he is very interested in the non-legal options because he believes that the legal options are they have side effects, unintended consequences. And so he was interested in what else can we do? And he sort of challenged me, and he said, you're a techie. So what do you do to protect your private data? What do other techies do to protect their private data? And then he offered up his own solution, which is to deplatform himself. And he said, if I believe strongly enough in protecting my own data, isn't deplatforming a real option? So tonight, I want to talk about that. I want to talk about the non-legal options for protecting our data. What are the things that, if we're going to have to wait 20 years for the real solution, 20 plus years for this real solution to be implemented, what are the things we could do now that wouldn't require us going to the government and asking for their assistance? So with that, let's start with his suggestion or his first proposed solution, which was deplatforming. Let's talk about what that really looks like. What are the costs of this? As we were talking before the show, we identified some social costs and some actual costs, some financial costs to this. So let's start with the first main problem I see with deplatforming, which is that you can deplatform off of some platforms, but some of them you cannot be opted out of without big costs. And in this case, let's talk about the financial costs. So for example, some schools use Google Apps. And if you want to not use Google Apps, well, you're going to have to find a new school. That might cost you. That might cost you a lot. Maybe you have a scholarship to a school that uses Google Apps, and you're just going to have to forego that scholarship and go somewhere else on your principles. And then many companies use internal systems that harvest your data, and you'd have to go and find a new job, right? And you don't know where that company's actually sending your data because many companies outsource their services to other companies and they send their employees' data outside the walls of their company. So what do you think about the idea of opting out of services?
Well, again, like you said, it's not that easy. There's pressures, social and otherwise, financial. Besides that, you got to keep in mind, in some cases, you didn't opt in the first place. You aren't the customer, you're the product. So let's talk about Equifax. People talk about why can the market fix, the security issues, the Equifax breach. Well, no, if you didn't have the law, what's the incentive? Like Equifax just gets your data from other companies it's extremely difficult to try to opt out. And going back to the social costs, if you did opt out of Equifax and TransUnion and Experian, and someone ran a credit report and nothing came up, there's a huge cost to that, because since we don't actually have, as we previously talked about, digital identity and web of trust, we don't have that. So because we don't have that, we need some kind of proxy to try to gauge whether someone is trustworthy. And we don't really have a good way of doing that in a large society. The closest thing, which is a long way off, is a credit report. But the problem is the credit report was only designed to say, if I loan you money, will you pay it back? That's it. And that's a lot different than, there's all kinds of other trust. Like, can you keep a secret? Like, are you trustworthy with children? Are you, decent to other people? Are you decent to work with? Are you considerate? These are none of that stuff is covered in will you pay money back? And so we use that as a proxy, but it's such a shallow measure. It just doesn't work out at all. But the things that you have to give up, if there's no credit report, you probably can't buy a house unless you can pay cash. You probably can't get some jobs. You definitely cannot get a security clearance. That's off the table. Like, you're not getting any kind of government clearance, because one of the biggest things they look at is, are you in is there financial pressure that could be applied to get you to leak state secrets? And that's a really obvious one. So the first thing they check before they waste money sending out agents to interview all of your family is like, do you have a whole bunch of debt? So someone else could be like, hey, if you just tell us what's going on over here, we'll pay off all your loans, all your student loans, whatever else. So there's a ton of stuff. And every time I think I know everything that a credit report will screw you out of, I keep hearing new examples. It keeps getting used for more and more stuff. And so again, like, even if you could meaningfully opt out, the cost would be so high that, you would, unless you want to be a martyr for the cause, you're not going to do that.
I agree. I mean, even, you look at it's called the karma system in China, the social credit system.
Social credit. Yep.
Right. I mean, this can affect, which apartments you can get into. This can affect all aspects of your day-to-day life. And it doesn't seem that it's very far-fetched that this would come to America at some point.
It was, there are people talking about it already. It's kind of already on the way here. Let's hope we can stop it and reverse what damage has been done. But there was actually a Black Mirror episode called Nosedive that is an awesome kind of exploration of this. And then only, a year or two after that, China's like, hey, we're going to do that. And you're like, oh, that was a warning, not, a suggestion, really? So...
Yeah, I love that episode, Nosedive, because of all the Black Mirror episodes, it's really lighthearted, and it's not as it's not as scary. Well, no, I mean, there's consequences. There's deeply unsettling ideas, but it's not as scary as a lot of the other ones. Well, and in I will its say, presentation,
the cinematography is beautiful. It has a very the color palette has this kind of pink pastel. It's extremely well done in every way. So.
I when I first watched it, I was noticing that it's got sort of an Instagram filter throughout the whole thing.
Yeah.
And I was wondering, is that intentional? Because that's clever.
Yeah, no, that's a great episode. It's one of my favorites, probably top 3, top 4. So
right.
Anyway.
So let's talk about the idea of your company. So I would imagine that this person in my life would probably say, well, choose a job where you don't have your data harvested. Become an electrician, become this or that. And the question...
Become a truck driver, right?
Well, a truck driver, I would imagine that doesn't really work very well, because all modern truck systems have built-in computer systems in the truck now in order to track time and things like that. So, I don't think that
everything
works.
Time, speed, location, everything.
But are there any kinds of honest jobs out there where you have less risk of having your data harvested?
I would say that the difference is not whether you will, it's whether you currently do. because the truck driver example, the reason I brought that up is because it's absurd, but also at the second Decentralized Web Summit, I had the honor of meeting Whitfield Diffie. So he's one of the fathers of public key cryptography, just brilliant, brilliant mathematician, groundbreaking work. And I was in the front row of the talk there listening. And one of the lines that has stuck with me that he said was, communication diminishes autonomy. And he talked about truck drivers in the past. You pull up, and even if it's not your truck, because some drivers own their truck and some don't. But even if you pull up and they put stuff in the truck, and then back 50 years ago, however you're going to get there, whatever you're going to do, they have no control. The only thing that matters is if you said that truck, it's going to be there by Friday at this time, you better be at the dock by Friday at that time. Whatever happens between now and then, if they only loaded half the truck and you have an opportunity to like pick up an extra load and haul for someone else kind of on the side, and it doesn't cause any issues, you could do that, make a few extra bucks. You could stop over for some recreational activities at a certain stop and no one would know. You could do all kinds of stuff. It's completely on you. You can't do anything these days. Like the entire trip is completely logged. They tell you which route to take. They don't let you decide. They're like, you're going to take this route. You're going to take stops here, here, and here because the law says you have to. Although, again, if the law wasn't there, they might let you just drive till your brain rots from lack of sleep and then just replace you with someone newer. And it just there's no autonomy. And what we're seeing, I wish I had you pull up a video beforehand, because one of the things over the past end of 2020 and beginning of this year, there's a thing called pose estimation that uses computer vision. And see if you can find a video of pose estimation. They're using it to assess ergonomics, because people who work at like Amazon warehouses or any kind of warehouse where you're just like lifting stuff and doing things, if you lift wrong, you're going to get injured. You're going to cost the company a whole bunch of money. So they're now using pose estimation to look at the pose. It puts like a stick figure over your body, tries to estimate
Dear fellow scholars,
the angles of most of your joints and stuff. And that's perfect. 2-minute papers. Awesome. So they're trying to basically tell you how to stand, how to squat. Like, again, this is communication to a degree. It's not communication to an outside thing. This is slightly different than that. It's communication to a computer system, but it does diminish your autonomy. Now it's not up to you how you're squatting and standing. The system's going to yell at you if you lift something wrong. And you're either going to learn how to lift it the way they want you to lift it, or you're going to get fired because you're going to cost them too much if you injure yourself, which kind of good, but kind of not. So they're going to be collecting data on you all day. You'll be, the entire day you're sitting there, you're working, they're going to be collecting that data. And this is not being done you mentioned electricians and plumbers yet. I think as soon as that's an option, anything a company can do to maximize profits and minimize losses is probably something they're going to do, unless there's a law saying they can't. So that's, as drones and things get super cheap, I can totally imagine a little tiny drone following you into the house and actually watching to make sure, and especially for electricians, you can burn down a house if you screw up the wiring. I can imagine a drone or two, little micro drones over your shoulder, recording just in case there's a lawsuit, recording that, having someone else back at, or a computer vision thing, or someone else back at the, headquarters, like signing off on your work to make sure that you don't, cost them a ton of money burning down a house. So I think that right now, this idea that you can opt out, there's some areas where you can kind of prevent data collection, but whatever you're doing, the amount of data being collected, the ability to collect it in all circumstances, give it 10 years and show me a job, no matter how manual, unless you were working only for yourself. And even then, I still see data collection being a thing. Who's seen those? I'm sure at this point, everyone's seen the commercials from all the auto insurance companies. I forget the names right now, but they got the little thing that plugs into the OBD port, the onboard diagnostics port on your car, and you save all this money on insurance. Wait a minute. What's that thing doing, though? Like, the amount of data, if you've never used an OBD scanner, that you can pull out of your car is so far beyond what you see on the onboard, like the dash display. You got a few little dials you can look at. there are hundreds of parameters that get many times a second recorded on the car's computer that you never see. And, mechanics can get to it if they have an OBD reader, and those have come way down. Those used to be hundreds of dollars. You can get little Bluetooth ones now that are like $40. And a lot of times, if you have a light come on, you plug it in, it's like, oh, it's real simple. Just do this. You're like, oh, cool. I don't even need to bring it into the mechanic for this one. So that is data collection. And part of that is that I think a lot of people don't realize when you plug that in, they don't realize how much they're giving up, how much information is going to their insurer. And they don't work for the insurer. So anything that requires insurance or interfacing with large companies that want to mitigate risk, like good luck in 10 years. If we don't pass more laws to prevent this, everything will be collected all the time to maximize profit, to minimize loss, minimize risk, and optimize workflow, like all the time.
I can't disagree. I would, I'm trying to think of some counter arguments that this person would actually come up with here. But the main one that keeps on coming up is, maybe you feel like you should pass these laws, but they're not going to go down the way that you think. Even if you did pass the laws, they're not going to have the intended outcome, or if it does have the intended outcome, it'll also have unintended consequences.
Of course.
But
I guess for not passing the laws, there will be consequences. And my thing is, by not passing the laws, we can already easily, based on current trends, we can extrapolate out and say, well, obviously, this is just going to keep going in this direction. The only thing that would stop it from going in this direction is a law, and there will be unintended consequences, as we've seen. The more data that's out there, there was an article saying data is the new oil, and it's okay. So why did they make that claim? What do they mean by data is the new oil? Two things. First, data is worth money. It's precious. Not super precious, not gold, but oil, if you collect enough of it, you can make a hell of a lot of money with oil. But then the second thing is when you spill oil, it's really costly and does a lot of damage. So data breaches, data spills are costly. Now, that's okay. It's a decent metaphor, but there was another law, I think it might have been Schneier, who wrote, no, data is the new plutonium. And just like plutonium, so anyone who hasn't studied basic nuclear physics, just a little reading up on I did a report way back about the first atom bombs on Hiroshima, and they do all kinds of fancy crap to make, an atomic bomb, but it's actually really, really simple. If you have enriched uranium or plutonium, you just put too much of it in one place, boom. The only reason you do all the fancy stuff is to need less of it to get a bigger boom, just kind of make it go further, because it's really, really hard to enrich, stupidly expensive. So, but if you just have too much in one place, that happens. And if you want a horrible reading, but interesting, supercriticality accidents are, people playing with enriched stuff, even just solutions, and kind of having smaller versions of whoops. So really interesting. Read about the demon core and all that at Los Alamos. But data is much more like plutonium or uranium than it is like oil, because once you start collecting it, once you go past a certain size, you're almost guaranteed to have some kind of disaster or abuse. So it's a lot less like oil. Like just the act of collecting too much of it will lead to abuse. And we've seen that again and again and again. We've seen what Facebook's done with ad targeting and manipulating. There was actually a terrifying article. There's a whole bunch of stuff about them advertising weapons to some of the protesters and people who might be likely to protest, which, okay, it's technically not illegal, but seems like maybe not the greatest idea. And there's plenty of other examples that are prior to the protest that are not politically charged in any way. But the most disturbing thing I've seen lately is one of the ad categories in Facebook is service members. And that anyone with any slight military background should be terrified. The ability to decide what information is shown to the U.S. military gives our adversaries the ability to mess with our troops, to actually directly psychologically attack, to conduct psyops or psychological operations in a targeted fashion against our troops. So the fact that Facebook has figured out who all the active duty military people are on the platform is a massive national security risk. And this is that data is plutonium. We have now basically given our enemies a psychological atom bomb because Facebook has collected this specific data. So
is there anything? I mean, I would imagine it's crazy illegal for Facebook to sell that data to other countries, right? That's treason, isn't it?
I don't know. I don't have the legal background to know about just selling like who's in the military. They're not technically selling who's in the military. They're selling the eyes of who's in the military. So if they want to promote some kind of crazy conspiracy theory, or if you want to, promote some kind of, let's take a sinister long-term view. What if you had a product that we don't yet know is harmful? Like, it's harmful. Let's say you're a foreign adversary and your lab has built some kind of new drug, because tailor-made drugs have been a thing now for 20 years where, because the law always starts, everything's illegal until a law is passed to make it illegal. And it has to necessarily be that way, because otherwise everyone would just be in jail for everything, right? Because you're gonna do all kinds of stuff. Everything you might do is not enumerated. So it has to be legal until made illegal. So same thing with drugs. Like the drugs that are illegal, scheduled drugs, Schedule 1 is stuff that's just straight up illegal, no health benefits. Schedule 2 is stuff that's, dangerous, but there's health benefits. I think it's like morphine and opium and stuff or not opium, but opioids are Schedule 2, if I remember right. Oh, it's been a while. I should have looked this up. But there's like at least 4 or 5 schedules. And then as you get higher numbers, it becomes, more legitimate uses, less danger. And over-the-counter stuff, I think, is Schedule 4. But again, not a pharmacist. Go look up drug scheduling if you're interested. So once a drug is scheduled, then laws apply. And depending on what schedule, various laws, it's either a tiny bit, some stuff is kind of okay, however much you want to buy. Some stuff like Sudafed is a gray area because you can turn into, higher schedule stuff. And therefore, you can't just go buy up a ton of Sudafed without gaining attention from the cops and the feds. And then other stuff is just straight up illegal. You're not allowed to sell, a lot of the drugs that are still illegal. But everything else, if you were to take those, a chemical and make a chemical that's very similar to, say, THC and marijuana, because marijuana now has been I guess technically not descheduled, but a lot of states, like I think Arizona, we just passed recreational marijuana. So THC it's not unscheduled, but it's not that illegal anymore. But even if it was, let's say, but prior to that, if you modified the THC molecule just a little bit, you added just an atom somewhere, well, it's not THC anymore. So if you actually got arrested for having this synthetic THC, then you could be like, it's not THC. Test it in a lab. And then they would, and I guess it's not THC. Now, what it would actually do in your body is a big question mark. And this is the problem. I've had actual friends where their kids have ordered fake marijuana. This was actually like 20 years ago. And
JWH018.
There's a whole bunch of these chemicals, and the problem is none of them are really tested. So you don't actually know what they'll do. And the difference between, for example, sodium chloride, table salt, delicious, necessary for life, dangerous if you have way too much, but otherwise, pretty benign. And just sodium or just free chlorine, same atoms, but arranged differently. Chlorine is super toxic. If you have just straight up elemental chlorine, super poisonous. And sodium's not super happy either. So, and then fluoride, like in your toothpaste, fluoride, perfectly safe, awesome for, dental health. But if you just take raw fluorine gas, super dangerous and toxic, basically lights everything on fire on contact. So little tiny changes by one atom are really important. And this is the kind of stuff where, sorry, it's late. We're recording this really late. I got a little too far off on a tangent on this one. But by nature, we have to have it legal, and unless we have to wait till damage is done in some cases to say, wait, this is bad. There are some ways of kind of getting in front of that with the law and saying, well, based on other things, we can make an inference and say this will be a bad thing. And that's where privacy laws and stuff, we don't have to wait. We can say, look, this is like plutonium. This is going to go bad places, and therefore this is very similar to other times. So we're just going to say all of these things that look like this and act like this are bad ideas, and thus illegal, to prevent problems from happening in the future.
Right. So I'm really surprised by the idea that we have national security risks inside of these corporations' databases. I had never thought of that before. So it goes to show that even certain kinds of national secrets, things that are of paramount importance to the highest levels of government, can't be kept out of these databases.
Yeah.
You know?
And why would they be? So here's the other problem is displacing risk. And this has been the actual innovation. When you look at gig economy companies, the risk, this is like the genius business move. Normally, if you have a taxi, right? Let's say, DC, you have a taxi company and you hire me as a driver. So you pay for the taxi, you pay for the gas, you pay for the maintenance on the taxi, you pay for the insurance on the taxi. You basically pay for all the stuff. I show up, I give you my time driving, you give me some money, maybe some other benefits, unemployment insurance, all that kind of stuff, right? So I take not a lot of risk, really. You're making most of the money and you're taking most of the risk, but you're a big company, so you can afford to do that, right? You have some cushion. And I just show up, I trade you my time for some money. Uber's very different. Uber, it's my car. I pay for the maintenance. I pay for the gas. I take the risks of, basically everything, insuring it, all that stuff. That's all on me. And all Uber does is, besides collecting data about me, they send people to me. They coordinate. They act like a dispatcher. But unlike a regular taxi company, they don't do any of the other stuff. They just act as a dispatcher. They're just scheduling. And everything else is on me. And so the problem is when you're collecting all this data, it's the same thing. When a breach happens without laws to actually cause there to be a disincentive, like if Uber, if I burn out my clutch driving for Uber, it's not their problem. There's a whole bunch of other people desperate enough to drive for Uber. I'm immediately replaced by someone else, right? It just doesn't matter to them. Like all of the risk of that falls directly on the driver. And it's the same thing in a data breach. Like without laws, they don't care that my identity got stolen and like now I can't buy anything. My credit is destroyed and someone took out $100,000 loan in my name. They don't care. Their problem. That's my problem. There's plenty of other customers to keep buying. So risk externalization is a major problem, not to mention mediation, terms of service, all this. The risk can be just pushed onto the customer and they can do horribly dangerous things. And you as a single individual have zero power to do anything about that. What are you going to do? Like if there were no law, if you can't go after them in court, and even if you could go after them in court, that's where the mediation comes in. The new thing is when you sign that terms of service and you sign up for certain services, you agree to binding arbitration. So when something does happen, the what little protection the legal system gives you, if you can afford a decent lawyer, you might be able to sue them and actually get some financial relief from what happened. Once you sign up for one of these agreements that, again, when you're clicking, just okay, whatever, I just want to use this thing, you may have just signed up for binding arbitration and you don't even get to go to a real judge. You get to go to an arbitrator. You get to go to a company that's paid by this company to save them legal fees. I'm sure that they're going to be super fair. I'm sure they're going to be just as good as an actual judge and be super fair, because you're not paying their bills. The company's paying their bills and their job is to save the company money. But I'm sure it's going to be fine. I'm sure they're going to be just as fair as a judge and they're going to, settle in a way that makes you whole. I'm positive that will happen, even though there's zero, they owe you nothing. And all of their money is coming directly from the company that is paying them, that put this together to make sure you can't take it to a real court. Okay.
So I guess the way this ties into deplatforming is that so we went over how if you do deplatform, there's some services where this is going to cost you a lot. And you're saying that you're just tying into if you have a certain kind of a job where they're collecting data on you, well, this data could be caught up in a breach. And if it is caught up in a breach, it can be used against you.
Yeah.
And
Not could. What I was saying, the whole plutonium, it will be. Once you collect
Right.
enough data, you're pretty much guaranteed there will be a breach, or there will be abuses within the company, which we didn't even cover.
Right.
Just data. Once you collect too much of it, something bad's gonna happen. It's not an if, it's not a maybe. It's basically 100% once enough of it's in a pile.
Gotcha.
And what I'm tying in with is, like you said, is there any way without the law that we can deal with this? And right now, from the aspects of it we've explored, I don't think so. Like, there's no incentive whatsoever.
Well, we still have more to explore.
Okay.
So let's go through that first.
Let's do that.
So, for example, another service that can't be opted out of without big costs would be something like LinkedIn or Monster.com, for example. These are services which are asking for a lot of very important data about us, like very detailed, data about our past and about our aspirations. If I was somebody who is trying to find somebody to compromise, for example, well, I would probably have their resume at the top of my list of things that I want to get my hands on. It's somewhere at the top of the list.
LinkedIn, as awesome as it is for building your career and finding great guests for our show, LinkedIn is a major risk for corporations. I was just there's an unclassified, not totally for the public, but a briefing for people in business from the FBI, and their warning was, be very careful, especially right now, if you're getting requests from people that you're like, why is this person wanting to connect on LinkedIn? Be real skeptical, because it's a great way of getting corporate intelligence, and corporate intelligence is a great way of pulling various scams. I haven't heard about these happening as much lately, but one of the old scams was just literally making up a fake company and just calling up the CEO and being like, hey, or actually finance, whatever, like, hey, CEO, I just spoke to him. You guys are, 3 months late on this invoice. You owe us, $150,000 for this product. And if you know the names of the people in finance, if you know the names of the CEO, which a lot of time you could pull all this off LinkedIn, then everyone's busy. If you're telling them the CEO told you to do this, they're thinking they already signed off. They're just going to go ahead and authorize it. And this has happened. The worst one was one guy. The biggest one I saw anyone get away with was $250,000. The biggest one was 50 million from Facebook and 50 million from Google. $100 million that this dude fraudulently told both companies, hey, you forgot to pay me. And it worked. They had no way of verifying the identity. They're like, all right, it looks legit, send the money. Now they caught him. He didn't get away with it. But before they caught him, $100 million just because he knew the structure, he knew the names of the right people to ask. So this idea that data, just even names of people in an org chart, is very sensitive data.
Right. But I want to focus less on the risks of being on the platform. And I want to talk more about the costs of getting off of that platform.
Okay.
Because this whole thing is about deplatforming. It's about what are the costs to us? Are we willing to take on these costs? Are these acceptable to us for being able to only partially protect our private data? So far, what we've covered is that we can opt out of some things, but if we want to opt out of them, there are costs, like we might have to find a new job. And that job doesn't even have a guarantee of not always, being shielded from the collection of data, because all professions are moving toward the collection of data. And maybe that is a place. Maybe that's a place where you'll have a lot less private data collected about you. If you're an independent contractor, you're working small jobs, I can see how you would have less data, collected on you. So sure, there's a small benefit there, but then we also said, there's other places where we can't opt out of that. So, or rather, if we did, it might actually backfire on this independent contractor job, for example. We might have to give some data out to other people in order to just show them that we are trustworthy contractors, for example, right? So the idea of quitting LinkedIn or Monster.com or other places, maybe Yellow Pages and different kinds of things where you're giving descriptions of how you do your data, or having your own website, which is going to put a lot of information on there about you and your company. Opting out of all those platforms is also necessary in order for you to shield yourself from that kind of data. And where does that leave you for finding a job, right?
Well, so basically, if you want to try to fully opt out, which is just impossible because the government shares some data with some of these big companies, like some of your data, I don't care if you are alive today in America or really most other major countries, some of your data is going to some of these big companies. There's no way around it. It doesn't matter how thoroughly you try to opt out. But to your point about the cost, there was a great series of articles. I'm trying to remember the magazine they were in. There was like a 4 or 5 part series where this reporter, I'll try to dig them up so we can put them in the links. She had a friend build a little firewall application. So she set up a VPN on her phone. So all the traffic from her phone went back to her house and went through this firewall that could see it could actually not just see where the data was going, but it could block all of the data going to certain companies. And so there's something called an AS number, is it assigned services? Got to look that up for me. But AS numbers, you can look up an IP address and you can find out who owns the IP address. And so like if you look up your home IP address, that your IP address, unless you're paying business or whatever, is more than likely owned by your ISP. And you can look up, it looks like Cox or Comcast or, CenturyLink. Oh, it's owned by them. So for really big corporations, you can look up the AS number and you can see all of the IP addresses for all of their things. Right. So the experiment was they set up a firewall and they blocked the ASs, all the IPs under each ASN for Amazon, Google. There were like 4 or 5 of them. Facebook, Amazon, Google. I'm trying to remember the whole thing, but there's a series of articles and they individually blocked each one. I don't know if they did all of them together. And Facebook, the web was still pretty usable. Obviously, you couldn't use anything from Facebook if you're blocking Facebook. What was the other one? Google, there was a lot of stuff that was way harder to use. There was still a lot of stuff that worked. But if you don't connect to any Google-owned IP address, a pretty decent portion of the web doesn't really work right. Like you can't get into anything that uses reCAPTCHA because that's Google-based now. They bought it up quite a while back. So any website that's like, are you really a person, not a robot, is just, you can't get into it. You won't be able to beat the CAPTCHA. So that's really annoying. But that's not every website. And then Amazon. If you block Amazon's IPs, you basically can't use the internet because AWS is so much stuff outsources to something in AWS that if you can't connect to those IPs, the internet is functionally useless. There might be a handful of websites you can go to. You can use alternate protocols that aren't the web. Maybe like you could run Freenet, or you could maybe do some BitTorrent, and just some other protocols. Gopher's not quite dead yet. No one's heard of that since the 80s. But like you could kind of use a very tiny corner of the internet, but that's about it. If you block Amazon, just there's nothing left to work with. And I don't think she did Cloudflare or anything, but again, tons of the internet is. So if you tried to block all those and you're like, look, I don't want any of these big companies. I don't want anyone to collect my info. I'm going to set up a firewall that blocks access to all the major corporations, all the FANG companies, plus Cloudflare. At that point, the internet is basically useless. So you can't really opt out. And even like we said, some of your data is still going to some of these companies. You go to a party, someone takes a picture while you're at a party, while you're at a family function, post it to Facebook. You're still in that picture. They are still running facial recognition and collecting data on you. If you have a cell phone in your pocket that has any kind of Bluetooth or Wi-Fi functionality, then as you're walking around, other access points are collecting those. This is another piece of Google has really good location accuracy because it uses GPS, but it also uses Wi-Fi data and it also uses Bluetooth data. It pulls a lot of different data. So anyone running an Android or iPhone, is collecting data on nearby Wi-Fi access points and nearby Bluetooth access points to help improve mapping data. So that data is being collected. And, normally it's not very useful, but yeah, if Google wanted to say, wow, where are all the places we've seen this MAC address for this Bluetooth or this Wi-Fi thing, they could pull that up easy enough. Okay. So yeah, even with no internet access, there is still data being collected. It's pretty much impossible at this point to fully opt out.
So you kind of answered a little bit of my next question, which would be, what would happen if well, first off, let's acknowledge that as long as you're on the internet, then you're going to have to give some data to Google, to Amazon, to many different companies in order to just have websites function properly. You're going to be blocked from using certain websites if you've fully opted out of those through what I would consider to be a pretty technical solution for an average consumer, which is setting up firewall rules. And so you just can't you can't really truly scrub or not scrub, but you can't block the internet from harvesting your data as long as you're on it.
Let me just head this. Oh, okay. I was going to say I want to head off two things in the past, but go ahead, finish first.
No, and I'm saying so if you're on the internet, mm-hmm. you're going to have your data collected, whether or not you're on platforms. Now, real quick, I want to know the answer to this, which is there less data being harvested on you if you do deplatform yourself? And if so, is it a negligible amount less or is it significant enough that deplatforming at least does something?
It does something. I don't know how useful that something is. We'd have to get into a whole threat modeling thing, and maybe we should have James back on and do that. But yeah, obviously if you're on Facebook and Instagram and you're posting selfies like 30 times a day, 60 times a day, whatever, well, obviously they have like all your info, right? If you have voice assistants recording all the time, which by the way, there's been all these cases where people are like, oh, I just mentioned this thing. I mentioned Disneyland, and like 5 minutes later, I'm getting ads for Disneyland. I just said Disneyland. That's all that happened, right? And then, of course, Facebook, Zuckerberg in front of Congress, as well as many others, is like, no, we don't listen in on the microphone. We've never done that. So even if that's actually true, which I kind of doubt that it's true, Spotify actually just filed a patent. They want to just listen in on your microphone so they can serve you better songs. They can just listen all the time and see what your current emotional state is and then suggest songs better, which to me is a terrible bargain. No, you don't get to record me 24/7 from my pocket. So my music, no, I could choose my own songs. Thanks.
Right. What is it going to pick up certain things on the mic and start playing 70s, funk and it's like, we've noticed that you have brought somebody back to your place.
Manilow starts playing.
Barry White.
So that's a terrible trick. So they actually patented that. So even though they've been denying that happens for a long time, Spotify's like, screw it, we're just going to patent it. So the thing I want to head off though is no, you're right. There is a difference. Whether that difference is significant, we should do a whole other show about what types of data and what's the risk of each type of data, and then what can you do to minimize that type of data collection.
Perfect.
But we're not going to go into it. Now, the thing I want to say though, before we move on, because someone's going to bring it up, well, I'll just use a VPN or Tor. Tor is real trendy, and it's slightly better than a VPN. So the problem with that is, first of all, a VPN, all it does is instead of all your data going through the local network straight onto the internet like it normally does, and out through your ISP or through the coffee shop's ISP, it encrypts it and it goes on the same path encrypted, but at some point it leaves the VPN. So it goes through the VPN server. So what you've done is you've traded the danger of having your data go through your ISP or through the coffee shop's ISP and potentially whoever else is on the coffee shop's network. And you've traded that for whoever owns the VPN. And the VPNs, some of them are okay. Some of them are sketchy as hell, especially the free ones. And how do you think they're free? Because they want your data. So you've just, okay, now no one at the coffee shop is snooping, but now that VPN has all your data every time you run it, which is worse. And it's probably a VPN outside the US, right? So they have no restrictions legally. They can grab everything.
Right.
Because again, no laws to get in the way. And the other thing is, even if you have a great VPN, let's say you have some mythical VPN that is awesome and they really truly believe, and because again, all these VPNs say, oh, we don't log any behavior. No. We value our users' privacy. We do not log anything. There have been at least 3 major cases that have hit the news where they subpoenaed the logs and people went to jail because they logged. He's the one saying they don't log. That's their whole thing, is we log none of your stuff. Bullcrap. Right. Wait till there's a court case. They log it. So Tor is kind of like that. Tor is a VPN-esque thing where it kind of chooses different. It's called the onion router. It does a thing called onion routing. So just put layers of encryption. Instead of the VPN, one layer of encryption to one endpoint owned by one company. Tor wraps it up, and then it kind of takes some semi-random path out through all these nodes, takes off a layer of encryption each time, and then eventually pops back out without the encryption. So it's like a fancy, complicated version of a VPN. And as far as one individual, like one organization spying on you, yeah, Tor's better about that. That's less likely to happen. But even assuming you're using something like Tor or the one magical VPN that doesn't log and doesn't collect data, the way the browser works with browser fingerprinting and cookies and all the other stuff, I'm working on an article. It actually got way too big. Someone asked on LinkedIn about privacy, and they said, here's everything I'm using. Is it adequate? And I said, that's a good start, but it's nowhere near adequate to keep all your data from leaking. I'll do a write-up. And then I started writing about all the ways data is collected and what's collected, and it turned into 100 headers. 100-line file with nothing but the section headers. So that will be an article series coming out on EGX. I don't know if it'll be a month or 2, but we will be releasing a comprehensive thing about what can you do to stop some of this tracking practically. And so all the different ways they track, you're still leaking data, even though the path of your connection to the website you're going to is now really, harder to trace, much harder to trace. Not impossible, but harder. They still know if you're not like wiping your computer. There's a thing for reporters called Tails, the Amnesic Incognito Live System. And the gist of Tails is you put it on a thumb drive, you plug it into whatever computer you have access to, and it boots up a little OS that you can get on the web and do stuff. And then when you pull it out, it just wipes itself and it starts over every time. So there's no way to track you between devices. So anything short of that, and that's not even totally foolproof, but anything short of that, I don't care what you're routing it through. There are machine identifiers. There are cookies. There are just the stuff, the web extensions you have installed. The way your computer renders things to canvas on a website is a unique fingerprint. There's all kinds of fingerprinting and tracking techniques. Google just released a whole new set of them because everyone wants to get rid of cookies now. So Google's like, we'll find better ways to track you. And they did. And they're harder to evade than just wiping cookies, which is not good. And so even if you're going through Tor, they're still collecting data on you and still collecting which sites you go to. And so, yeah, it's really, really hard. It's damn near impossible to prevent data collection short of Tails or Cubes or any of these other super paranoid OSs or switching machines every time, which is pretty expensive. It's basically impossible. So this is why we need laws, is because it is so incredibly costly and difficult to try to opt out. For any sane analysis, it is impossible to get the protection of something like GDPR, which is not perfect, should go a lot farther, but it is impossible to get those protections without legal support. It is just nonsensically difficult and insanely complicated.
Okay. So let's recap again, because we keep going off into like side stories, and we only got a couple of minutes left. So I want to make sure we get all this down, concisely, which is, again, we can opt out, but with certain kinds of costs that'll affect our where we go to school, where we have a job, things like that. There's still an outstanding question, which we'll answer in another episode, which is, what is the actual value of that cost? What is the actual trade-off there? So we don't know off the top of our heads exactly how much data you are saving yourself from leaking by opting out of these platforms entirely. But we'll explore that in a future episode. There are, in fact, some services you can opt out of without a financial cost or without it impacting your job or your school or whatever. However, for example, Facebook, you will have social costs. So, for example, you may lose contact with your friends and family today is more difficult offline than before, like in the past, because there's a social expectation of being on certain platforms. You will meet somebody and they'll ask you, "Oh, what's your Facebook?" And as somebody who's quit Facebook a couple of times, I can say, I don't have one. I'm above that, like I was able to actually do that. But the social pressure of this, not just social pressure for me, where, for example, it was hard for me to just talk to friends and family, which it was, but also when I started this show, I was like, oh, well, I was like, I really want to, get this out to a larger audience where there's folks who might actually be interested in watching this show. So am I really just going to leave Facebook on the table and say, yeah, I'm not going to actually share this show with anybody on Facebook?
Yeah.
The hundreds of people that might actually be interested in this show, I'm just going to leave them on the table? No, I had to go back on my choice of not using Facebook because I wanted to have a page on there that people could actually go to. I wanted to have it so this way we had a presence online, and you just, in a good social media strategy, you just really don't want to leave anything unutilized. You want to use it all.
And that's the problem. Just like what you're talking about, small businesses face that all the time. I have friends who are small business owners, and it's like, if they don't have a page on Facebook, it's really hard to survive, especially in post-COVID times.
Right.
So
the point is that there's cost to deplatforming. And even if you do deplatform from all of these services, the regular ambient internet, just going to websites, is going to start harvesting data from you as well. And if you do cut out all of those through special router rules and firewall rules that make it so it's impossible for your computer to actually send anything to these AS numbers, which, by the way, I looked it up and it's autonomous systems.
That's right.
So the autonomous systems number, then you are going to break the internet for yourself. You are not going to be able to shop on Amazon. You are not going to be able to go to a lot of websites that have CAPTCHAs and things like that.
Let's make it even more concrete. I mean, not anymore. They have their own infrastructure now, but Netflix used to be AWS when it started, when they started streaming. So if you wanted to watch Netflix, but you didn't want to interact with Amazon, you're not watching Netflix back in the day. Like now it's different, but it's really insane how many levels of outsourcing are on many sites.
Right. And so just being online will have your data harvested just by being connected to an ISP, because your ISP itself is going to actually harvest data about you, and there's no way to opt out of all of it. So just by having an internet service provider account, you're going to have some data collected about you. So, but then let's imagine, all right, you know what? I'm going to go all the way. I am going to cut the cord. I'm going to get offline. I'm going to cancel my subscription with the ISPs. you still have a phone in your pocket, and that phone is harvesting data about you. And every time you walk past something, it's going to send some of that data to that. So, okay, fine. You know what? I'm going to get rid of my phone now. I'm going to totally get rid of that phone, and now nobody can track me. There's cameras on all these corners, which if they're not today, they will very soon be doing facial recognition and things like that.
Stores have been pioneers with your phone, but this is easy enough to transfer this technique to facial rec if it hasn't already been. Like, they want dwell time. When you stop in an aisle and you're deciding which toothpaste to buy or whatever, they want to know how long you're standing. Did you just grab something and not think about it? Or are you sitting and really thinking and reading the package? And so they have put in, this is years old. I don't know what the current state of things is, but they have special antennas that are highly accurate that can figure out where your device is down to like an inch or two. And so they know exactly what product you're standing in front of. So even if you don't have a phone, if there's cameras in the store, which give even more information and track the same person based on facial rec, gait analysis, tons of different ways of identifying you that can be retrofitted later on an existing data set, then you're walking around with no devices. Let's say you have no electronic devices on or in you, no pacemaker, no phone, no watch, nothing. You come into the store, the cameras are picking you up. When you go to pay, unless you pay cash, that your credit card has your name on it. And so they could just use the timestamp of when this person was standing in front of this register, and then they can use facial rec and other analysis to trace you through the entire store. And so that by paying, they have now associated your name. Then they can go to a data broker, buy the rest of the information about your preferences that you leaked from other sources. It is incredibly difficult to keep your information yours at this point. The only way to even try to mitigate this is with laws, which is not perfect, but there's nothing else.
Well, let's leave that for the end. Let's leave that for the end, because we still have just one last thing to go over when it comes to deplatforming, which is, okay, I have got rid of all of my social media accounts. Mm-hmm. I've deplatformed myself from the internet. I deplatformed myself from phones, and now I'm actually wearing this special paint on my face, which makes it so the cameras can't really see me all that well.
Everyone will stare at you like a freaking weirdo. But yeah.
But, I got facial tattoos that, put little blocks of color on my face, and now facial recognition.
Yeah, the tattoos that'll stay static over time, and they'll still be able to identify.
Okay, so I'm changing my paint. I'm changing my paint every time I go out. Okay, but even if this is the case, it's still possible for me to be forcefully opted back in through things like company acquisitions. Yep. Explain real quick about how that works.
So I will use my personal example. I think our tax code is overly complicated, like insanely overly complicated. I'm a fan of a flat tax, but
to be fair, if you're not on the internet and you don't have a phone, you probably don't have a job and you don't have to pay taxes. So
yeah, so I don't like our tax code, but I don't blame that on the government because I am aware of a program in California called Ready Return, and Ready Return is trying to bring some European goodness of tax simplicity to America, and has been for like a decade or two. And everyone who's gotten on it in California loves it, because the way it works is if you don't do your taxes, in Europe, if you don't do your taxes in some European countries, they just send you a postcard and they're like, hey, we already have the information. Like, just send us this much. We're good. It's great. It's easy. You don't have to think about it. Ready Return is not quite that simple, but Ready Return has a website. If you're in California, you can get on the program. You go to the website and they say, well, we already know what you make. The company already reported everything. So here, we calculated your taxes for you. Because otherwise, if they didn't already know, how the heck could they ever audit you? So they already have the data, right? They have forever. And so here's what we think you owe. Just go ahead and hit pay now and you're done. You don't have to hire anyone. You don't have to pay any money to anyone to do your taxes. Now, if you do have a whole bunch of exceptions, you want to play that game of totaling up all your receipts and all this, all right, click here and go ahead and do whatever crazy stuff you want and hire whoever you want. You can go ahead and do that if you feel like it. But if you're like, you know what, screw it, I think that number's fair. I'm just going to pay and be done with it. And I don't want to waste more than 5 minutes on my taxes this year. It's amazing, right? And you get better compliance because people are like, click, paid, done. It's as easy as buying something from Amazon. You spend no mental effort. You just pay and done. So the reason this has not become a national thing where just paying your taxes is just the IRS, since they have all the data anyway, just here's what you owe. Let us know if we're wrong. Let us know if you want to take, deductions and whatnot. Go right ahead. Otherwise, just here, send in the check and call it good. There has been massive lobbying, tens of millions a year by H&R Block and all these other TurboTax and Quicken and all these guys that make enormous sums of money because it's so freaking complicated to do your taxes. It's basically impossible unless you are a CPA or you love spending time with paid like reams of paper. Like you're just going to hire someone, right? And if you try doing the free file stuff, they just upsell you. You click the wrong button once and you owe money, right? So there's a huge business motive here to keep the taxes complicated, to keep the dollars rolling in. So I don't like that. I think it's disgusting. I despise H&R Block and many of these companies. Like, let's simplify the taxes. I'm happy to pay my share. Make it easy. I don't want to waste more than 5 minutes. What do I owe? Cool. Here's your money. Next. I have better stuff to do. So I have tried to find other tax solutions again and again and again. And for multiple years, every time I find some small startup that has a better, easier way that's super simple, still not as good as just going to the IRS website, click, here's your money done, like Ready Return, but at least not H&R Block. The next year, bought up by H&R Block. That's a forceful acquisition. So because all that data that I filled out about my taxes that I was trying to keep out of H&R Block's hands, that doesn't just get deleted when the company gets bought. That goes with the company. So even if you try to keep your data out of the hands of companies you disagree with, they'll just get bought up by bigger companies more than likely. And then your data's in their hands. And we've seen similar attacks with browser extensions. Like there's been 3 or 4 lately that were totally reputable. I call this an ownership transfer attack where the maintainer's just like, dude, I can't maintain this anymore. I got other stuff to do. I'm going to sell it to someone. I don't want it to die. We have a ton of people that use it. So, okay, here. And they take a small payment or whatever it is and transfer it off to another company. It's going to maintain it now as a product. And that company suddenly puts a whole bunch of analytics code and tracking code into the extension because people will notice. They're like, wait a minute. This nifty little extension I love browsing the web that helps me do whatever. Now it wants all these extra permissions. Now it just doesn't want the data for the one website. It wants data for every website. It's asking for all these other tracking permissions. What's going on here? So this is a problem. Even if you try to do your diligence and keep your data safe and keep away from all this nasty tracking stuff, as stuff gets bought up and, companies transfer ownership and extensions and software transfers ownership, it's impossible. It's really, really difficult. And you can't go back in again without a law like GDPR. You can't go back in and be like, hey, I only said you as this current entity could have my data. I didn't say you could sell it to some bigger, more nefarious corporation. You got to delete it now. Like, if you even have enough time to make that request, like right now, there's no reason they're going to do that. So yeah, it's really, really difficult to keep your data yours.
Very true. So that pretty much, I think we've exhausted our notes at least here. There are
we had one section left, but we're kind of out of time, so we can cover that in another episode.
Well, I left it out because you had spoke about this article series, you want to do at EGX, and you said that you came up with 100 lines of just headers for the thing. So
yeah, it's a beast.
I was going to talk to you about maybe we could make an episode out of just the headers and just try to go through, have a conversation about what we had in here as the last section, which is what can we do about this? But I'll throw in what we did write down just real quick. We don't have to get into it, but if you are interested in the very short list we came up with over things we can do today It was that you can encrypt data that you have control over. Unfortunately, that doesn't really work all that well because most of the data that's going out, you don't have control over. And we went into that pretty well, I think, talking about ISPs and phones and things
there's
like that.
But there's one other aspect with the encryption that is worth covering, which we talked about off air, which I think is worth, there have already been articles, so let's throw it on air. Even if you encrypt, there's two issues. If a company has the key, they can still get your data. And so when all these companies touting end-to-end encryption, if you're not managing your keys, which almost no one is because it's hard to do right, it's time consuming and difficult. If you're just like, oh yeah, end-to-end encrypt for me, okay, well they have a copy of the key. So there you go. Now you have no security against that company eavesdropping. And even if they are, like worst case scenario, if you're not running custom open hardware, then there are ways of grabbing the keys from memory. Keys are actually easy to find because of the mathematical properties they have. There's, the technique that was pioneered in a cold boot attack, trivial to dig through a ton of memory and find a key or a key schedule, as it were. So if you have that, then you can decrypt the data. And then Apple, the other thing is side channels. And this is not the normal use of side channel. It's not quite as technical, but there was a recent article about Apple has this whole big thing about, oh, we encrypt all your data and the feds can't get to it. Kinda, not really though. So technically, yes, the data on the phone is encrypted and they have a little key in the secure enclave and all that. And it's pretty inconvenient to try to get that back out of the phone. It's reasonably well protected. But if you don't turn off backups to iCloud, well then, those backups aren't encrypted. So just because the copy on your phone is encrypted, if it's sending the unencrypted version for backup, maybe I don't get the stuff you just put on your phone right now. Whatever the last time it backed up was is what I have access to in the backups. Probably close enough. So even encryption, we have to be very careful throwing around VPNs and Tor and encryption. I see people throw this stuff around like magical phrases and incantations and talismans. It's like, no, it doesn't. No, you don't just say it and suddenly you're secure. Like there's a lot of ways it can go wrong. There's a lot of ways to, use these things and still be at great risk. It's very hard to actually apply these things in a way that actually works out and keeps all your data private. It's close to impossible. It requires extremely deep knowledge. Frankly, the ability to deal with a lot of pain. Like I have my stuff reasonably well locked down, not as crazy as I could be. And people already like planning the show. We've had, and it's not the only one with DC, but he's like, seriously, dude, just go to the friggin' website. And I'm like, I got to turn on JavaScript. I got to unblock a whole host of servers. I don't want to unblock the trackers. I got to find out which servers are legitimate that are needed to make the site work. And it takes me like a minute or two to get a modern website working because it's like, oh, look, it wants to connect to 50 other servers. Okay, I have to let it connect to these 20. Otherwise, it doesn't work. The rest are obviously just trackers and garbage because it works without those 30 servers. So it's painful. Like every time I go to a brand new site, I have to go in there and unbreak it, which I can do because I've built websites, so I can figure it out. So
yeah, but
my information's still out there just like everyone else, just less of it.
It's arguably not as painful as trying to collaborate with you online. So, like everything I try to connect with you on, you have to go through at least a half hour, if not more, of disabling different kinds of security layers while cursing about it. So tonight was a good example. We had to come up with a new way of sharing notes. And that would that take us an hour of cursing? Both of us got cursing about that one.
Yeah, it really was. Yeah. Anyway, we're not going to shame products, but yeah, SyncThing's amazing. That's what we ended up on. It's open source and it actually works, and it's not full tracking.
See, I'm totally going to shame this product. Evernote totally dropped the ball tonight and forced us to try a bunch of different other options. I won't shame any of the ones that just didn't do what we wanted it to do, because that's fine. If you don't have the feature, I can find another thing that does the feature. But Evernote's charging me money and could not do the most basic things tonight.
Yeah, we're not even talking tracking. It was just a total catastrophe.
Yeah, it was absolute garbage. And I've been using Evernote for just years and years and years. And so finally tonight decided to try out Alio's. Alio's solutions are sometimes very complicated sounding. And I have a lot of resistance to adopting them because I'm like, you know, I really don't want to install a bunch of crap and configure it and all this crap. But he got me mad enough tonight about Evernote that I threw in the towel and I was like, all right, you know what? Let's try it. Let's try this sync thing. And wow, sync thing's totally awesome. It's not just good for this, it's good for a ton of other things. This is the second episode where we're ending it on like a promotion of sync thing.
But this is like
sync thing. If you're out there, we want you as a sponsor.
except they're an open source project, so they have no money. So
you know,
but that's the thing is like, yeah, we'll get into that some other episode.
I didn't know it was open source. That's even better. It is. That's awesome.
I wouldn't be using it if it wasn't open source.
True.
But yeah, and that's why, again, it is open source. So yeah, some company, you buy sync thing out, I'm just going to fork it. We're still going to have our stuff. I got the source code already. So,
well, you know, it's good that we can fork it since Evernote's been forking us all night. So, all right. So real quick, I just want to wrap up the small amount of things that we can do. So we just said, you know, you can encrypt the data that you have control over. And so this way, even if it gets leaked, yeah, the side channels are something
super hard.
But I'm just going to consider that's not something you have control over. End of story,
yeah.
Right?
But you that just also goes into your calculus, like how much pain are you willing to take? And if it's not 100% effective, you know, if there's a good chance that it will get leaked anyway, then the pain's not worth it. You know, you have to have that assurance that it actually won't leak to take the pain.
The question was, what are we doing to protect our own data? And the answer is we're encrypting the stuff we have control over, and we're trying our very best not to have our personal data in places where we don't have control over it, but we have conceded that this is we don't think it's I don't know. I'm going to speak for myself, but I don't think it's super worth it to try and stop my personal data from being harvested, because I see the great links that you go through, Alio, and I know that your data's still out there everywhere. Yeah. You admit it all the time, you know? So it's like
I'm going to say that what we need here, this is one of those problems, and this is going to be controversial to some, but it's true. So I'm going to say it anyway. This is not a problem. There's some problems you can solve on your own. You could take personal responsibility and take the initiative and solve it on your own, right? This is not one of those problems. There's some problems you can do all you want by yourself. It doesn't matter. It's a systemic issue. It's an architectural issue. And it doesn't matter how hard you by yourself try to solve this. The only way to solve these problems is by getting a lot of people together and coordinating on a solution. And global warming is one of those. You can, you reduce all the low flow toilets and all the low flow shower heads and all the stuff you want to do. If you're the only one doing that, it doesn't matter. It has no effect. It's got to be something that companies and governments and everyone on the planet cooperates on to have an impact. With the state of the modern web and how intertwined all the companies are and how messed up everything is architecturally, like, yes, it's probably not worth spending a ton of time. Putting an ad blocker on, worth your time. There's a few other small things you can do. We'll cover those in an article in another episode, etc. So there are some things that are worth doing because there's enough benefit and it's low enough effort that it's totally worth doing. But as far as like keeping all of your data out of corporations' hands, pretty much impossible. The only way we're going to solve that is by everyone getting on the same page and being like, this is bullcrap. We've had enough of this.
Right.
And whether it's laws, whether it's switching to open hardware, open software, where we have full control of our stuff again, and there's no little tentacles sneaking in there to harvest data from us. That's the only way to solve this problem, is by collective action. It is not a solvable problem for an individual.
Well, let's end this episode on that note, because I think this is the ultimate point. If you'd like to listen to the rest of this whole episode in order to understand some of the deeper nuances of our reasoning, go for it. But if you only listen to one thing and you need one single soundbite to sum it all up, it's that software and hardware, which is open and able for us to secure our data through these kinds of systems, are the ultimate solution, non-legal solution. That is the solution right there. It's that we need systems that support strong digital identity, systems that support encrypted data transfer to identity addresses as opposed to IPs, location-based addresses. That's what we need. That is the ultimate solution. But that solution is at least 20 years off, in my estimation.
Well,
there's been some
movement.
A cynic.
Yeah.
I'm a cynic.
So the piece that's missing, all the tech is there. The piece that's missing is making it integrated enough and making it easy and friendly enough to use that people who are not us, people who have not burned 20, 30 years of their life learning all the arcane dark arts of computing and how to get these things to behave occasionally, like, it needs to be something that just works. And
right.
and that's where SyncThing did a really good job. SyncThing is really easy to set up. I would say it's way easier than Dropbox. So that's the kind of thing, and that's the missing piece. We're getting there. I just played with a brand new thing called Radical that's code hosting. It's kind of like the fully distributed version of GitLab and GitHub. It's what Git was meant to be. It's the missing synchronization transport piece of Git. And it's amazing. It was super easy to set up. And that's what we want. We want technology that's transparent, that just gets out of your way. That's one thing that drives me nuts about Evernote, because I did try installing it so we could collaborate. And it does this awful thing that Microsoft was known for, the wizard thing. Instead of just being clean and easy and obvious, it makes you go through an onboard. I'm like, I've been using computers but most of my life. Get out of my way. I've designed sites like this. I know how it works. I don't want to spend the next 5 minutes clicking through your stupid hand-holding dialogues before I can even see if the thing will work, which it won't. Like, just get out of my way. Have a good UI. And that's where, if we can do that with some of these open technologies and make it very easy, very clean to set up, then people will start adopting it. And when they start adopting it and everyone starts using it, just like Facebook, everyone hates Facebook. I know few people now, if you ask the man on the street, hey, do you like Facebook? At this point, most people are like, no, I hate it. It doesn't work very well. It's kind of okay. It's like, but everyone uses it, so I'm on there. That's the most common answer. Everyone uses it at this point. We've all seen Zuckerberg lying to Congress. We've all seen all this stuff. And the social network is exposed a lot more, and Tristan Harris and Yep Tufekci, et cetera. So network effect is very powerful. When you have 2 billion people, what is it, about a quarter of the planet using it, it's hard not to be on there. So if we have protocols and open software where we get to that point where most people are using, like email, then it's really hard not to be on there. And if that is something that gives you back control and respects your privacy and the rest of your human rights, then we're in a really good place. And then, because now people are aware of these issues, once you get to that level, once that network effect kicks in, then it's going to be very, very hard for companies to pitch, hey, we just want to steal all your data and see how we can monetize it. Like, we've played this game once, we saw how bad it was. And if we can move away from it, now we'll be in a good place, I think, for the foreseeable future. But who knows?
See, and I'm just trying real hard to take all this stuff that we pulled out and put it into a box and wrap a bow on it, and you keep opening it back up, pulling the stuff back out.
I love Christmas.
So let me try and wrap this bow one more time, which is, what can we do? I'll mute your mic. But so what can we do? What can we do? The answer is not much. And I think, Elio here, he's very security conscious. I'm not as much. I have given up. I just straight up gave up. I'm just like, I don't have the time to fight this stuff all the time when I'm a person who just wants to like produce shows. That's what I want to do. I want to produce shows. I want to work at, cool companies, and I want to do cool things there. I'm just not going to be able to get around it. Anyway, I was going to name a certain
you
system,
and everyone else. I mean,
but
look what happened when Apple made Facebook say what they were doing. When people know what's going on, when they have a choice, they don't. So most people are just giving up. I just want to do cool stuff. I just want to live my life.
For me, it's more, I consider myself to be sort of a data realist, because when it comes down to it, I don't want to fool myself into thinking that I'm doing something about protecting my data when I know that my phone in my pocket is harvesting stuff about me all day long. My phone is probably sending to some server somewhere at least, like 8 hours a day, the temperature of my butt. It's going, DC's butt is this particular temperature at this particular time. There's probably a chart somewhere in the world.
That would be a lot less funny, or a lot more funny, I guess, if I literally just this last week, they have pads. I think this is China, but it'll come to a U.S. company soon.
Oh, right.
Pads that go on your chair that can detect whether you're in the chair, obviously. If it's you, yes, butt print, recognition, and your emotional state, your heart rate, and some other stuff. And it's just horrific because now your boss knows when you're not at full working capacity for whatever reason. You just took a rough phone call. Like, they can see your heart rate's elevated. You're not working well. Like, what a dystopia we're building for ourselves with all this data.
Right. Well, so my final question for everybody out there is just this. Given that deplatforming is not as effective for all the reasons that we talked about as one might hope it might be, and given that it costs a lot, both in finances and in social costs, given that the real solution is going to be strong software and hardware that's integrated at a very low level throughout the internet, and that integration is many years off. I mean, whether you believe me that it's 20 plus years or you think that it's 10 years, both of those amount of years are pretty damn unacceptable.
Yeah, it's probably more
than
5.
But the point is that we're out of real options. And if we are going to have, our real options right now are, for the next 5, 10, 20 years, I really, really think it's going to be 20 years or more, then you either have no solution, which means that your data can be sold, can be traded, can be harvested without any of your consent, and then it can be used against you in courts. It can be used against you in all different kinds of ways, like it can be used against you when getting a job. It can be used against you.
We're already seeing redlining.
Right. There's all kinds of ways that data could be used against you. On top of that all, the companies can be breached. And when they're breached and they steal all your data, they wouldn't have to tell you anything about that.
You keep using can, not are.
No, let me finish my thought.
Okay.
So the point is like your data could be stolen, and then these companies won't have to tell you that it was stolen. They can get your credit card number and your security code from some company that's not storing your data properly, and they won't have to tell you that. And then you don't lock your card, and then boom, identity theft. Sorry, folks. You just happen to type in your name into a particular social media, company's website. Well, that's what you're going to have to deal with for the next like 20 plus years. And you're just going to have to accept it. And when your kids, have their financial lives ruined, you're just going to have to say, well, it's worth it. It's worth it because I avoided a legal option. And we've already conceded that legal options, it's a fair point. They do have unintended side effects. They do have unintended consequences. Yes, the people who were complaining about, the companies that were complaining about, they probably will find a way to get their hands in on writing some of these laws. That's probably how it is, because that's the world we live in. But if we can actually get it so this way we have some solution in terms of standardizing how our data is going to be stored and saying that, you know what, you have no business actually making a system that has logins and passwords if you're going to store them without encryption. If you can't figure out how to do that, you should not be actually working in this industry. It's the same thing as letting a doctor perform a medical procedure on you, but they're not really a doctor. It's like, we're engineers, and real engineers should know something about encryption.
Minor pedantic note, because this drives me nuts when I see other places talk about it. Passwords aren't encrypted. If you're encrypting passwords, you're doing it wrong. They're cryptographically hashed.
Small, fine, whatever.
Critically important difference.
Muted. So the thing is that if you're going to be designing websites, if you're going to be designing systems that process data, there's a certain amount of just competency that these laws are supposed to enforce. Does that mean that some person, some entrepreneur who has this idea for bringing something to market but doesn't know how to do this kind of cryptographic hashing, if they don't know how to do that, they can't participate? Yep. That's what it means. It means that particular entrepreneur has to go find somebody who is a qualified engineer in order to implement their login system. Does that mean that some people won't be able to afford it and they're not going to be able to play ball? Yup. And guess how many other places in U.S. society that is fact of life? Now, if you're saying, you know what, I want the whole thing to not have any laws. I want doctors not to have laws, food, the FDA to not exist. I want to make it so that that's fine. I'm not saying that you shouldn't have your beliefs. That's fine. Just know that that's totally it's unlikely to happen. Like doctors are probably still going to be, certified. You're probably still going to have the FDA. And while we're at it in this world, we might as well have it so this way those who are supposed to be protecting the very data that can be used against us to hurt us and to hurt our families and to hurt our loved ones, hurt our friends, those people should be qualified to be able to do the bare minimums needed in order to keep that data not only safe, but also keep some logs of where they got the data from, when they got it, where they sent that data, who received it. And then they should also have a requirement that says that if they are unfortunately breached, if their company was breached, they were hacked for some reason, well, guess what? They have to notify their customers.
I'll push a little harder on that and say that to me is the short to midterm solution, because data is plutonium. You're still playing with some dangerous stuff. And to me, the longer term solution is going to fully distributed protocols where you just do not ever collect enough
Again,
plutonium
yes.
to actually be in danger. And you don't have to worry about who's holding your data because they're not.
Exactly.
It's under control.
And please, if you're wondering what we're talking about with strong digital identity and encrypted transfer protocols, well, check out we did a episode called Strong Digital Identity. Go check that out. It's super simple, very easy to digest, and it's just all about the real solution to all of this, which is don't give them the data in the first place. Then we don't have to require them to do anything. We don't need a legal solution if we do that. That is a technological solution. It's just that the people who are in power right now, this is not something we can't make. This is something that is super feasible. We could make it with very little research and development. It is absolutely possible. The problem is adoption. And it's the scale of adoption that is needed, because you have to get the whole dang world to agree to encrypting their data this certain way. And have you ever tried to get like any amount of people to agree to all doing something new in a new way? You know, like imagine you have to go to all of the companies in the world and say, hey, folks, we're not going to give you any more data. B, the data we do give you is going to be encrypted. And C, well, you know, we're probably going to avoid giving it to you. We're actually going to go around you and send it to each other directly. And these companies are just going to say, they're going to say, how do we make money? And they're
worth a mention here is Shirky's principle by Clay Shirky, famous economist. And Shirky's principle that any company or organization that exists to solve a problem will fight like hell to make sure that problem continues to exist.
There you go. And that's a very good way of putting it. It's that the problem is that we have centralization of our data, and that we don't have strong we don't have strong standards as to how that data is stored. We don't have strong standards for how what a company should do in case that they're compromised. We don't have those. And so the solution is to not give them the data. Then they don't have those problems. Nobody has those problems. However, they are fighting. They are actively fighting to make sure that that problem stays right where it is. Because as long as they have that problem, well, then they have your data. They can do things with it, like target ads to you. They can do things with it, like create certain kinds of reports and sell those reports to the rest of the companies in the world. So this way they can understand, they can do market research and things like that.
And this is where I like open source, because problems are profitable. If you make a problem for someone, like our tax code example from earlier, let's keep the tax code super complicated. Now I can sell you software to deal with how complicated the tax code is. Microsoft moves their interface stuff around somewhat arbitrarily in Word and Excel and whatnot. So you need training. So now Microsoft can sell you training to get around the changes that they arbitrarily made, even though everyone was happy with how it was. So the problem is, when there's a profit motive, making problems and then selling the solutions is extremely lucrative. And so we got to have something, whether it's laws or alternatives that are based on, like SyncThing does not stick itself in your face. It doesn't have logos everywhere because it's just open source. It just does its thing and syncs, and that it gets out of your way. And there's an interesting write-up about Dropbox, where Dropbox taken off. Dropbox, it puts a big folder that looks like Dropbox that has their branding right on the desktop to make sure you remember that it's worth paying for Dropbox. And like, it's really interesting. I want to do another show. Not obviously, we're running out of time here, but I want to do another show at some point about innovation, because I think people have a really warped sense of what actual innovation looks like and what actually enables true innovation to happen. And we've got this narrative that just allowing companies to do as they please and having everything hyper profit driven is innovative. And I think that's completely backwards. I think it's actually extremely inhibitory to real innovation, But I'm going to leave it there. That's a teaser. We'll do another show about that because there's a ton out there.
So, and my last point is just that my next last point is is that because these solutions are the real solution is so far off, because it is not acceptable that we actually wait for these solutions, because the companies are going to refuse to solve this problem all on their own. The temporary solution is to put in these to enforce certain standards, and this is what leads us to the legal solution again. This is why I am proposing the legal solution, or why I support the legal solution right now, because the consequences of it, which are unintended, the risk of the unknown, is to me worth exploring, considering we know what will happen if we don't do anything about it, and that there aren't any good technological solutions that we have available, non-legal solutions right now, in order to achieve the things that we had just mentioned. We need something at all. And if somebody can come up with a technological solution that can be implemented now, that is going to make it so this way companies don't have our data, that our data does get shared peer to peer. Well, if we can,
no, I mean, part of the reason is that our data is already out there. Like it's been 20 some years of us doing the wrong thing. We could have put the proper technological solution out there and headed this all off at the pass, and we didn't. So all our data is out there at this point for the most part. So the only technological solution that can undo that, and this is a terrible idea, is like an EMP bomb. Just wipe everything, just destroy all the tech, and now our data's not out there.
All right,
but the cost to that is so insanely high. That would be very, very stupid for us to do that. So the only other way to fix it without just utterly decimating and destroying our economy is by law and by forcing companies to do their part in cleaning up the mess. And that gives us the best of both worlds. It may have some economic cost, but it has massive societal benefit.
I want to admit, I want to be clear that I'm going into this with both eyes open, in that I don't know what the cost of the legal solution is. The unintended consequences could be just about anything, and there's not really any way for me to be able to predict what they might be. I might be able to get maybe close-ish, but probably when we're talking about unintended or unknown consequences, they're unknown. We don't know what they're going to be. What I'm saying is that I believe personally that the risk of exploring that unknown and accepting whatever consequences come that way is, to me, more acceptable than the idea of having things continue the way they're going right now. That is what I support right now. And it's because when it's a difference between a potential consequence or a known consequence that is definitely going to happen, it's the difference between 100% something sucks and 50% something sucks. Isn't it true? And when we're saying an unknown, that's what it is. It's a 50%. We don't know.
You're leaving some of the unknowns out, though. And this happens all the time when I hear people propose libertarian type ideas of we don't need the law. Is, yeah, sure, there are unknown consequences, unanticipated effects from government regulation. Same thing with just letting companies do whatever they want. That's what we're suffering from right now. Exactly. Is we didn't think Facebook would be a national security issue. Whoops. So pretending that there are no unintended consequences from just letting companies do, whatever, there are, either way you go, there's unintended consequences. That's not how you make this decision. It's not like one of these paths has unintended consequences and the other's perfect. Of course not. That's not even worth comparing.
That's a good point. And I'm trying to think of the counterpoint to that, but I don't see one. It's like,
there isn't. It's an incomplete analysis. You have to look at both sides objectively.
So I think that's it. I think we've exhausted this. We've beat the horse to a pulp, and it's everything's in this episode. So thank you for listening. Thank you to my my close person in my life. I do want to appreciate. I do want to say that I appreciate that the question was asked, and in a way, it was asked honestly. And I think that if we have to admit that the idea of the desire for there to be a simple short-term solution that is effective is natural. We want that. We all want that. We want there to be something that does not give, others more power over what we can do and restrict our freedom. That is definitely a reasonable position to take. In some cases in life, especially with tech, we can't get everything we want. It's not a question of innovation. It isn't a question of finding the right smart person in the free market to come up with something that's going to solve our problems. It's a question of technical debt. We have already long ago we built the internet wrong, and because the internet is built wrong, we are at the mercy of its capabilities. It can only do certain things, and in order for it to do the things we want to do, to preserve our individual freedoms in a true free market, laissez-faire style, we're going to have to slowly make the progress of convincing all the companies in the whole entire world to switch over to something new, or build a new internet and start moving each company over to the new internet. But either way, those are not trivial tasks to take on. And that's why I believe that it's going to take more than 20 years. It's that I just can't think of anything in the whole world. Look at Bitcoin and look at how much support it has in the world. And yet not every company in the world is supporting it. We need all of the companies connected to the internet to support this new way of doing things in order for
not
the true
Bitcoin.
No, but we need all of the companies in the world, all of them, not one exception.
Well, no,
we need them all connected.
I'm going to push back a little bit. We don't need 100% of them, because then it would never happen. So what we do need is a majority of them, or enough of them where we can all get our daily life tasks accomplished.
Okay, fine.
And that's one thing in our article series that we did is if you want innovation, to give another sneak preview, you need a dumb network. And so the phone system, it took forever to roll out caller ID because the entire network had to be upgraded. And the internet initially was a dumb network. It's just a bunch of pipes for shoving data through. And the advantage is, if I want to make a brand new app, then I can make an app. And if you and I are the only two people that have that app, we can get these brand new features of this app with just the two of us using it over these dumb pipes. And so that was really beautiful. And that does allow us to slowly roll this out. And so the problem is, right now there's too much pressure from having to use the centralized platforms that gets in the way of rolling that out. So
all right. So we need 100% of the services that are, socially important to switch over. We need Facebook, Monster, LinkedIn. We need all the schools. We need Google. We need those folks to actually switch over. Otherwise, it's just not feasible right now. The way the internet is written, or the way the internet's built, it's not feasible for us to have an individualist solution to this problem. And so it's either don't have a solution, live without a solution, and accept all those problems, or it is going to be a legal solution for now. And that's it. That's where we're at. And am I happy about that? I'm not really. I really actually truly am a little disappointed that I'm not going to live into I don't think I'm probably going to live into the I'll be old by the time I live into the age of true digital identity. Because I actually 20 years is that's my that I believe that's my minimum. I think if things are going the way they are, we could be looking at 50, 75 years in the future before the actual the companies and the powers that be decide to fully adopt these new protocols. But I'm happy to be proven wrong. If it happens in my lifetime, awesome. I'm not going to hold my breath. I'm not going to invest into anything that's going to tell me that it's going to be here within my lifetime, because I just don't believe it. So that's where we're at. I'm sorry if it's disappointing to find out that nobody I know, and Alio knows a lot of security experts. I don't think he knows of anybody who knows of a solution that's going to be implemented anytime soon that is going to solve this problem. There's a lot of people working on it.
Yeah, there's some good stuff. I know TrueSona has some interesting stuff that's deployable now, but it's not a full solution. It's the best you can possibly do that you can roll out today. But you're right. It's going to take a while. And it's either going to take a while, like you're saying, or it's going to get to a point where the breaches and everything get so expensive, the whole economic model just collapses because the costs are too high. And then we'll just have to do a reset. We'll have to return to paper for a little bit, redesign everything properly, and start over. That is a possibility. That won't take 20 years. It'll be really, really painful, but it won't take 20 years.
Yeah. Well, I think that's it. That brings us to the end, because I don't have anything more to say. I've already feel like I've kind of circled back a bunch of times and repeated myself. So I'm just going to leave it at that personally. Anything you want to leave everyone else on?
No, like I said, the one good thing, I guess, that I'll put in there, because I have had this discussion, variations thereof, hundreds of times at this point, with all manner of people and plenty of very, very technically minded and people in the industry, in security, in web design, et cetera, in large scale companies, all that good stuff. So I've had this a number of times. It's it's almost feeling rehearsed at this point. But some of them are starting to get it, which gives me hope. But yeah, the thing that they always push back immediately and then circle back on the end is, like you said, it's going to take too long. It's not feasible. This will never happen. Your ideas are great, but they're not realistic. And the numbers worth leaving everyone with: the cost in 2020, the cost of cybersecurity breaches and all that shenanigans, $1 trillion globally. The cost of buggy software and downtime and all that BS, $2 trillion globally. So the combined cost, because I'm guessing those two are not overlapping. I haven't cross-referenced both studies, but I'm guessing those are also underestimates, just because of the nature of measuring that problem and underreporting of breaches and whatnot. So let's just go with $3 trillion lost to broken software and breaches. That would put those losses as the 5th largest economy globally. 5th largest. So that's rising too. That is far, far worse than just a few years ago. There's a guy I was talking to on LinkedIn. His tagline was old stuff was $2.9 million lost to cybersecurity issues every minute. And I asked him, where did you get that? And he didn't respond for a while. He was busy. And then he just got back to me a week ago. And he's like, hey, he's like, it's here. Sorry, here's the link. He's like, actually, I couldn't find that link, but I found an updated version. I just updated my tagline. The number now, $11.4 trillion a minute. That is a lot bigger number. So this is growing, and it's growing rapidly. We're already last year up to the 5th largest economy. That's how much we're losing, $3 trillion a year. So I don't think we have 20 years. Like I said, I think the economics in just 5 years or less I think the costs of all this stuff being so broken will get to a point where the economics of using computers in any business will just completely fail. And we might see a reset. We might see everyone having to scramble and completely swap out. Like that's what Schneier was talking about with SolarWinds. It's all compromised, burn it to the ground and start over. It's not a fun solution. There will be pain. There will be unintended consequences. It's going to suck. But it's getting to a point where we're not going to have another option. It's not going to be a choice we make. It's going to be a thing that happens to us at global scale. And we can't continue. One way or another, we can't continue with what we're doing. And whether we get on top of it and fix it before it completely falls apart, or whether we just try to, rebuild from the ashes, one way or another, this is going to get changed. There's not another option. So I'll leave it at that.
And if it does get to that point, if it gets to the point where our online economy is collapsing due to security breaches, well, it's not going to be private companies that have the resources in order to upend the internet and fix it all. It's going to be the government again. So
they're the ones who invented the internet. Yeah, they might be the ones who have to clean it up.
The Hoover Dam is going to look like a kid's a high school kid's engineering project.
Yeah.
Versus what is going to be needed in order to revamp the internet.
Yeah. So I mean, the Hoover Dam is in one spot. The internet is in literally everything at this point. Like you're completely right. It's the way you're saying it doesn't even emphasize it enough. Like it's an amazing insight. It is hard to truly comprehend how insane the perspective of like having to totally redo everything, because IoT, it's in everything now. Everything.
All right. Well, I think that's it. Let's leave it at that. We're going to do a couple more episodes on a deeper dive into the trade-off of deplatforming, because you're writing those articles, and we'll go over that stuff once that's prepared, and we'll talk a little bit more about also whatever other kinds of solutions that might come up, but they have to come up first, and you'll hear it here first, because I swear if anything comes up that looks plausible, looks interesting, Elio and I are going to be super excited about it, and we're going to bring it to you as fast as possible.
I guess for our policy of ending on a hopeful note, I actually still have open. There is a survey of the Ecosystem Review, January 2021. I forget which. It was on Hacker News. Who put this out again? Oh, come on. Where's the credits? But they put out a little overview of all the protocols and applications that could help us clean this up. Who is the lab? Sorry, I don't have it. I have the PDF open. I don't remember where it came from. For privacy, they stopped tagging that on the files automatically. So I'm actually doing not a full overview like this document, which is how many pages? 61 pages, this ecosystem overview. Because I was planning to give a talk and do an overview, but there's just too much. So I will be giving a talk on Monday at 8 p.m. at the Southwest Cybersecurity Forum, and I will be doing kind of a history of what are the important bits, the important projects, how did we get here, what are the ones to pay attention to, what are the ones that honestly other people in the field are not paying enough attention to, and yeah, it should be decent. It's only going to be about an hour, so I'm going to try to cram in some important stuff in there. It's going to be a little more technically focused because it is for security professionals. It's not a general audience talk, but for anyone who's curious and looking to get a little deeper dive, and then I'm going to have some links and stuff I put out through that and also through egx.org that will have, if you want to go deep dive and find out how we fix the internet and what the future eventually has to be, there's months and months and months worth of reading and resources that I will have posted on there. So if you're technically inclined or just really curious, plenty to munch on there. So Monday at 8 p.m. Mountain Standard Time.
Is that going to be online?
Yeah, it's the Southwest Security Professionals Group. I will put a notice on egx.org, because their website is in need. They're a volunteer run organization and they have not had time to update the website. And I haven't had time to jump in and help them with that because I've been prepping the talk. So I'll make sure we throw a little link to that on our videos page. It should be live streamed and then it should be up afterwards as well. And I don't know, we might do a review or something on here at some point, but again, we're trying to keep this a little more accessible on this channel. So,
well, yeah, I don't know. I think it'd be interesting to maybe watch the episode on here and then pause it and argue about whatever I'm probably going to disagree with.
I'm totally down for that in QA. If people want to ask questions, we can take live QA on some of our platforms and have people ask like, well, what does that mean? And tell us more about that, etc. So, yeah.
Okay, cool. All right, folks. We've reached the end of our time, finally. On behalf of everybody at Fault Tolerant Live Productions, thank you for watching or listening. This show is only possible due to the generous contributions of our subscribers and our sponsor, EGX.org. Coding Chaos is recorded live with audience interaction every Saturday, and we release these every Sunday, Tuesday, and Thursday. If you enjoyed the show, please consider subscribing or rating the show on Twitch, YouTube, or your favorite podcasting app. And until next time, take care, keep washing your hands, and don't break your tech if it doesn't work right. Good night, folks.